Welcome to this session. My name is Barrett, and I'm going to be talking a bit today about how you can use Azure Cognitive Services, specifically the text analytics, to help you save relationships with your customers. So just to start with a little bit about myself. So a link to my blog, a little bit about me. I am a developer, a manager. I currently manage a team of developers working in the Microsoft Dynamics space for a consulting firm, working with a number of different clients. I'm also get a bunch of hands-on development as well. In my spare time, I also like to develop on some personal projects. I'm a gamer, model railroader, husband, father. Keep myself pretty busy. So I'd like to start off with a few statistics. So talking about customer relationships. So the probability of, an existing customer buying a product is 60 to 70%. And for a new customer, the probability of selling to them is 5 to 20%. Just by increasing your customer retention by just a little bit, you can increase your profits by a lot as a company. For most companies, in most industries, there's an average of about 65% of sales which come from existing customers versus, new customers. And loyal customers on average spend more, up to 67% more than a new customer does. Also, existing customers are much more likely to try out new products, new features on your products. And acquiring a new customer can cost as much as 7 times more than retaining an existing customer. And, in various studies, up to 82% of companies have recognized that this is the case, that keeping an existing customer is much cheaper than trying to obtain new customers. But if that's the case, then why is the customer retention rate generally less than 20%? So customers leave companies in droves. That's the slightest problem. As technologists, as developers, you might sit there and think, "Oh, I'm just a developer. Why should I care? That's not part of my job." But it is. It's everybody's job. There's a quote there that you can read, but it really is part of everybody's job to help salvage those customer relationships. Because, if you don't keep your customers, your company goes out of business, and if it goes out of business, then you no longer have a job. So that's why you, as a developer, need to care about the relationships with customers. A couple more statistics to kind of keep in mind. 46% of customers, when they file a complaint, when they contact a company, they expect a response in less than 4 hours. As many as 12% of customers expect that response in 15 minutes or less. And when a customer is unhappy, when they're complaining about something, that expectation is cut in half or even more. Somebody who's making a complaint, they want a response right then, and they're not happy if they don't get one very quickly. The problem is, most companies can take days sometimes to respond to customers' inquiries or complaints. So how can we as a company be more proactive, and how can we as developers and technologists improve our company's response to customers, and especially to customer complaints? So just a couple of examples. So here's one from my own personal experience. FedEx is a terrible company at delivering packages. They're frequently late. They're delayed. They don't know where packages are half the time. They send packages here and there and everywhere before it finally gets to its destination. But one place where they do excel is at responding. Here's a tweet that I put out back a year ago. I got a direct message from FedEx in 15 minutes after I put that tweet out. And you can see on the tweet, I didn't even tag FedEx in the tweet, but they have a system in place that looks for those kinds of things, that looks for mentions of their company on Twitter. And if they detect something that they need to respond to, they trigger, the customer service side. Now, obviously, the person that reached out to me couldn't do anything about the problem because, it still took another 3 or 4 days before I got my package in this particular case. But being able to see that comment and respond to it quickly helps improve at least a little bit, their perception, the people's perception of them as a company. So what I want to focus on today is talking about Azure Cognitive Services, specifically their text analytics, and how you can make use of that technology to help you to identify customer issues and to respond to those much more quickly. Because the faster that you can respond to a customer complaint, the much more likely it is that that customer is going to stay on board, that they're going to come back as a customer. Whereas, if somebody has a complaint, it takes days for you to respond, your chances of keeping them as a customer are gone completely. And it's not just that person. When somebody leaves as a disgruntled customer, they take family with them, they take friends with them. They make public complaints, and other people see those complaints, and they're less likely to be a new customer if they haven't been your customer before. So losing a single customer doesn't lose you a single customer; it loses you many customers. So you need to do, as a company, you need to do everything you can to retain those customers. So Azure Cognitive Services has a number of different technologies that can help you with those kinds of things, including, looking at text. With their text analytics, they can look at various things. They can pull out key phrases. They can identify personal information. They can answer questions, like chatbots, that kind of thing. They can translate from one language to another. They can summarize a long document into a few key items. And they can detect what language a comment or a piece of text is in. But so the thing that I'm going to focus on first today is the sentiment analysis. With sentiment analysis, it takes a piece of text, it analyzes that text, and it determines, generally speaking, whether that text is positive or negative or neutral in nature. It's not perfect by any means, but it can go a long way towards helping you to quickly identify issues and being able to prioritize responses to those issues. So here's an example of another tweet. Obviously, I can tell I've had a number of negative experiences with FedEx, but this particular tweet, if I took that and I pass it into Azure Cognitive Services, and I get back a response. And for this particular one, this was done through Power Automate. And I'll go through a couple of different examples a little bit later here of how to access the sentiment analysis and get responses back. And there's a couple of different methods that work slightly differently from each other. But in this particular case, this takes a block of text, it breaks it up into the various sentences, and for each sentence, it tells you, where that text is, in this particular case, the offset and the length for each sentence. And then for that sentence, it gives you a score. The probability that it's positive, in this particular case, in the first sentence, the probability that it's positive is 1%. The probability that it's neutral is 0%. The probability that it's negative is 99%. And again, with the second sentence, again, it's saying probability that's positive is 0, neutral is 0, and probability that's negative is 99%. So a couple more examples, I'd love to buy a new computer. That's generally a positive statement. Or why would anybody do such an insane thing? It's generally a negative sentiment. It's not, like I say, it's not perfect. There are times when it can misidentify something, but it does a pretty good job. So, generally, if you look at those two sentences, the examples that I have up there, you're probably going to come to the same conclusion, that the first statement is a fairly positive statement, and the second statement is a fairly negative statement. So that's enough of the slides. Let's go ahead and get into some demos here. So we're going to start with, I'm going to do a couple different demos. One, I'm going to start with Power Automate. So Power Automate gives you access to through what they call AI Builder, and it's requires the premium paid license to get access to AI Builder, but it gives you access to a number of different technologies, including text analysis, which includes the sentiment analysis, but it also gives you access to some of their other things like invoice recognition, image identification, that kind of thing. But today, like I said, we're going to focus on sentiment analysis. So let's start with Power Automate. So we're going to go ahead and create a new flow. And in this case, we're going to use an instant cloud flow because we want to, basically, we're going to have a form that will take in some text. You click a button and it will give us a result. So we'll go ahead and do that. We're going to manually trigger this flow. So go ahead and click create. So for our flow, we're going to have an input out of the text box. And that's all we need for this first step. So what we're going to do for the second step is to analyze positive or negative sentiment in a text, in a block of text. So in this particular case, you can tell it's using the AI Builder connector. And then for the language, we're just going to assume it's English. With Power Automate, it's a little hard. With a C# app or something like that, you can kind of figure out the language. But with Power Automate, you kind of have to assume what language you're going to be passing it in as. In this particular case, we're going to use English. And then for the text, we're going to use the input from the trigger. So, of course, this demonstration assumes that you have a basic understanding of how Power Automate works. So we've got our input, which is a text box, and that's really all we need for this. So we'll go ahead and save. Give that just a minute to save here. And now it's ready. We'll go ahead and click test. We're going to do a manual test. And we're going to go ahead and input our text. So in this case, we'll start with something simple here. And our flow is running. Take just a second here. There we go. So now you can see, here was my text that I passed in. And here are the results. So probability that the text is negative is 1%. Probability it's neutral is 2%. And probability is positive is 98%. So here you can see the more detailed results that came back from the sentiment analysis. Okay, let's go ahead and try another test here. Let's say I absolutely hate that computer with all my heart. And you assume that's fairly negative sentiment, of course. And we'll go ahead and see here. So, 99% probability it's negative, 1% probability it's positive. And let's try something sort of in the middle here. So let's say I'm okay with having chicken for dinner. And you can see there's 10% chance that it's negative, 58% chance that it's neutral, 32% chance that it's positive. So you can see that when you're using the sentiment analysis through AI Builder and Power Automate, you get basically you get three results back. So you get the chance that it's negative, chance that it's neutral, chance that it's positive. So that works a little bit differently than the other alternative, which I'm going to show you here in a second, which is using the SDK or the web API interface through Azure portal or through Azure directly. AI Builder kind of gives you a little bit different result structure. So let's go over here. So the first thing we need to do is create an instance for our text analytics. It works pretty much the same way that anything that you set up in Azure works. Now I've already got one in place here, so I'm not going to create a new one. But what we're looking for here is text services. So here's one that I already have created that I can use for various things, and I'll show that for a minute. So when you create this, let's go ahead and show you how to create one. So we just go in here, we'll say, I think it's under cognitive services, actually. There we go. So, if you were going to create this, you just go ahead and click create. You can select your plan level and whatnot. Like I said, I've already got one set up, so I won't be doing that myself. In this particular case, I already have one set up. So once you have it set up, the one thing you need to do in order to be able to connect to it from, for instance, a C# app, which I'm going to demonstrate in a second, is you're going to need a key and know the endpoint. So the endpoint will be the server that it's running on. That depends on which region that you set up your services in. In this particular case, I'm running out of East US 2. So you'll need that address there. And you also need to get a key, and I won't show you any of my keys here, but that's the two pieces of information that you'll need. So from there, what we're going to do is go into Visual Studio, and I've got a demo set up here. I'm going to show you. So this is a very simple console app that I've created to be able to access the cognitive services. So I've set up a string that has my key, my access key, and then I have a few samples of text that I'm going to pass in, and then I've got a simple function here. For each of those, I'm going to call this function, pass in the key, and the piece of text, and this function will create an HTTP client. It will set up the request text. So basically, if you're passing it in, you need to pass it in JSON format. In this particular case, in this structure here that I've got set up, you can pass in multiple sentences at a time. In that particular case, you would just add additional sections here. This is an array in your JSON text. You can just pass in a bunch of different ones. You just have to give each one of them a unique ID number. And then the results will come back. It'll say, okay, for ID 1, the result is this. For ID 2, the result is that, and so on and so forth. In this particular case, I'm connected to EastUS2. And then after that, you're going to add the /text /analytics /v2 /sentiment. And then you call out, you're passing in content type application JSON, and you get your result back. So let's go ahead and run this. All right, so I've got my text for each of those. So you can see the result that comes back is a little bit different when you're calling the web interface. So in this particular case, you get back the ID, the same ID that you passed in. In this case, I'm passing 1 for each of the IDs because I'm making them call separately. And then you get a score. And that score is anywhere from 0 to 1, with 1 being positive and 0 being on the negative end. So the closer the number is to the closer the number is to 1, the more positive the sentiment. And the closer the number is to 0, the more negative the sentiment. And then you've got numbers that are somewhere in the middle there. So let's kind of put all this together then. So let's say I have, I want to monitor Twitter, kind of going back to my FedEx example. I want to monitor Twitter for mentions of my company or mentions of my products or mentions of me personally, whatever it might be. And then for each of those tweets, I'm going to analyze what the sentiment is for that and then return a result. So we're going to go ahead and use Power Automate for that because it's a little bit easier. So let's go back over here to our Power Automate instance. We're going to go back to flows. We're going to create a new automated cloud flow. And we'll say Twitter sentiment. We're going to search for a Twitter-based trigger, so when a new tweet is posted. So in this particular case, just to make this simple, I'm going to monitor tweets from my own account. And when you're doing the search text, you can do any number of things. You can put in, names, you can put in hashtags, you can put in specific accounts. You obviously have to kind of be careful because, if you're putting in just a word or, a very common string of words, you're going to get a lot of results and it's going to trigger a lot of times. So obviously you have to be careful with what you set up here. But for this, I'm just going to say anything that tweets out from my own account. And then I'm going to analyze the positive or negative sentiment in the text. So again, it's going to be English, and I'm going to take the text of the tweet. So I'm going to get the result back from that. Go ahead and click save, and we're going to set up an automatic test. Or no, I guess you got to do manual test for the first one. I got that running. So now I'm going to go out here to Twitter. And we're just going to tweet something. Let's see, what can I tweet? There we go. Go ahead and click tweet. Come back over here to our flow. So you can see now it's running. Shouldn't take very long here. Although sometimes when it's watching Twitter, it does. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so I screwed up a little bit. So when it's coming from an account, you have to do from in front of the account. So let me try this test again. Let's just delete that and retweet it again. Okay. There we go. Now you can see my flow has run now. So if I look at the sentiment, 98% probability that it's negative. So now if you were to read that, and this kind of goes back to the example, of what I was talking about earlier, sometimes what you and I would consider positive and negative, sentiment analysis doesn't necessarily see it the same way. So in this particular case, it's kind of ignoring the really digging part. And it's taking the second half saying they're way too short and saying, okay, this is probably negative. So you have to kind of be careful with it. It's not perfect. It's not. It's got some things, but that's understandable. Language is hard. It's difficult to get it right, and it's difficult to get things to work the way that you want them to work. Or it's difficult to get a computer to understand natural language, no matter how much AI and machine learning and whatever else it is you throw at it. So in this particular case, it didn't quite perhaps get the sentiment the way that I, as the speaker, intended. Sometimes it gets right and sometimes it doesn't. So it's a starting point, and then you can take that and take the results that come out of these various things and use that to prioritize things. So maybe it doesn't catch everything, but it's certainly a lot better to respond to things quickly and maybe be a little bit wrong than it is to be taking 4 or 5 days or never at all responding to a negative sentiment. So what else can you do with language analysis and text analytics? So again, kind of sticking to our Power Automate AI Builder features. One of the things that an additional language analysis kind of thing that it'll let you do here is to classify text that's coming into a number of different categories. So, we've kind of looked at the positive, negative sentiment analysis. Let's kind of look a little bit at taking text and getting it into the right categories. So let's go ahead and start a Power Automate flow that's based on this. So what we want to do in this particular case is to look at a piece of text and try to figure out from that where it needs to go within our company. Let's say, we have a number of different organizations, each one has products assigned to it. Maybe it's an inquiry about a sales inquiry. Maybe it's a complaint. Maybe it's a question about a product support. Maybe it's a question about a particular product. There are any number of things that might come in an email or a tweet or a chat message or something like that. And we need to figure out who to get it to, get the response as quickly as possible. With classifying feedback into categories, it lets us kind of build a model around our various categories and let us redirect and use that to redirect customer feedback or questions or whatever it might be to the proper authority to respond to it. So with the categorization feature in AI Builder, they have a predefined model which you can use, which includes categories like issues, compliments, customer service, documentation, pricing, billing, and staff. And then you can also create your own custom category model, in which case you will be able to use that to more specialize and more focus on what it is that you actually do. In this particular case, we're just going to use the pre-built model here. So this is the one models that are ready to go out of the box kind of thing. You don't really have to do any training, anything like that. So you can see in their example here, somebody's looks at this text that says, okay, for product details, visit this website. It classifies that as documentation category. How about something else like, just want to tell you how wonderful Amy was in assisting us the other day. So click Analyze. In this particular case, it couldn't figure out what category that would fall into. Let me look at some of the random samples. I want to refinance my car. That's a billing question, pricing and billing. I want a very pleasant experience during my stay. That's a compliment, or I had a very pleasant experience during my stay. I really enjoyed the presentation of the keynotes. Again, it's a compliment. And it gives you a confidence score for each of those. So let's go ahead and use it in a flow. So we're going to kind of use this as our basis to start with. So there's already a template in here that will do it. So what we're going to do is an example of analyzing incoming emails and then routing those emails based on category to the correct department or to the correct person. So in this particular case, when an email arrives, because text analytics can't handle any of the formatting and things like that, so we need to convert HTML into plain text. And that's what this step here is. Then it does a categorization. So it takes that text and it's passing it into the category analysis, and then it gets a response back. And then for each of the results that come back, it's going to say, okay, we're going to figure out which category it is. In this particular case, it's just got a couple of examples. So case documentation. So if it's, if it comes back as documentation, then send an email for that. If it's a pricing or billing question, then it will route it to that group here. And each of those, basically it forwards the email, and you can specify who that's going to. Then there's a default instance here. So if nothing else happens, then you can send it to a generic inquiries email address or something like that. And if it comes back as a complaint, maybe you can. So let's add the category complaint. And then for that, instead of sending an email, we want to get a much more rapid response. So we're going to say Teams. So we're going to go into Teams and we're going to post a message in a chat or a channel. You can post it as a flow bot, which we're going to stick with in this case. And then you can select which channel it's going to go into, or group chat. So if we have a customer service channel, then you would post it into that so that people see it much more quickly than they would an email message, and they can respond more quickly to the result. So this is a good way that you can use Flow to analyze those incoming messages, or whether grabbing them off of Twitter, whether you're monitoring email boxes, whether you're monitoring a virtual agent on your website, whatever it might be, something where you can kind of watch it and see those messages that need a much more rapid response, and then be able to prioritize it. So in this case, if it's a general question, that's fine. We can send it to an email. But if it's a complaint, if it's something negative, then you want to respond to that much more quickly. So there are three main methods for connecting to Azure Text Analytics, or Azure Cognitive Services and their text analytics. And I've already demonstrated two of those. One of them is through Power Automate's AI Builder functionality. The second way is calling a REST API through code, which was the other demonstration that I did. And now I want to demonstrate the third way. So for C# developers, there is an SDK that's available, and there is actually for other languages as well. But the one I'm going to demonstrate today is a C# SDK. So what I've created here is another console application. In this particular case, the dependency that we're looking for under the packages is this Azure.ai.textanalytics. So I'm using one of the more recent betas because I want to demonstrate one of the features that they currently have available in beta, which is document summarization. So the document summarization, like I say, it's a beta feature. It's still in development. It basically takes long documents of various kinds, just basically big blocks of text, might be from a document, might be from a conversation, whatever it might be, and kind of pulls out some of the key points and the key elements of the document. In this particular case, I've taken the text from one of my blog posts off of my website and just kind of put it in here as a document to analyze. In order to use the SDK, once you've added the package, so you have to have your API key. You set up the Azure credentials using that API key, and you have to define the endpoint, which again, you need to make sure that that's the server that your instance of text analytics was created on. In this case, I'm using EastUS2. So you create a text analytics client, and then you call summarize text. Summarize text is the function that I created for it. So this function basically goes in here, it takes this text here, puts it together into a string. So it's a list here because you pass it in as a list of string. So you can pass in multiple documents if you like. Then we call the text analytics actions here, or we define the action saying we want to get the summary. And then we call out to our text analytics and wait for the results to come back. And once the results come back, you can kind of dig down into those results to find the final result. So basically to pull out a few key points, return them as sentences, so to speak, and you can pull out the text for those sentences. So let's go ahead and run that example. And here we get the results back. So the blog post is one about, whether or not, it's kind of an analysis of whether or not developers still need to have a college degree in today's age. So, it pulls out a few key points, and it's not you won't necessarily get the same results each time, but, highlights, some of the highlights from it. So, today there are companies that are struggling to keep talent. There are various ways that you can get into the industry. Boot camps have had both good and bad reputation in the industry. Working on open source projects is another way to get in. Working on charity work, there are a lot of opportunities to contribute. So pulled out 4 key points from a blog post that's a few hundred words. Not a big, huge blog post, but just some key points, and it pulls out a few of those highlights. So the SDK gives you access to all the various functionality within cognitive services and the text analytics specifically for this particular one. There are different SDKs for each of the features in cognitive services, but since today we're focusing on text analytics, that's the one I'm working on. So as with everything else, this gives you access. There are a number of different ways to access it and be able to implement that into the various programs and features that you want to develop. So I've gone through a few examples of ways that you can use text analytics to help you salvage those customer relationships. We need to, as developers, again, ask that question. We sit back and think, oh, that's not my job. It's customer service job. It's the management's job. But it's not. It's really all of our jobs to help make sure that our workplace will still be there for us in the future. So having the ability to improve customer service from a development standpoint is a key responsibility, rather, of each of our jobs. And hopefully, this has given you a few ideas of how you can put machine learning and artificial intelligence to work to help you to improve those customer relationships so that your company is strong and profitable and will remain so for many years to come. So that's about all. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me over LinkedIn or Twitter. You can take a look at my blog. I've got some more information about these kinds of things. I thank you for your time and for your attention.